We're in Mark 13, verse 9 to 16. Just pay attention. Isn't that what your parent or mother told you, or the teacher? You were turning around looking at whoever was behind you, horse playing around, and just say, "Just pay attention." Ma'am, I'm too poor to pay attention.
Maybe that's why you're poor.
That could be. Poor in spirit. The Bible sometimes reads like a diary written for strangers from a land far away. Because look at, we can't relate most of the time to what was going on. Even if we've been to Israel, we still can't relate to the culture. We can't relate to the to really anything that.
The lifestyle.
Yeah.
No running water.
Well, yeah, it's just walking water. In this case, the real writer of this is Jesus Christ, the Spirit of Christ, writing an answer to questions that his followers have had about the future. This is where the Olivet Discourse, this is what this is all about. They were very serious about wanting to know what was going on in the future, because Jesus has made last week he made some pretty astounding comments about the temple being destroyed and every stone being thrown down. And they're going, whoa, wait a minute, we just asked a simple question. We didn't realize all this was, what are going to be the signs that this is going to happen? We want to know. We want to be prepared. We want to be in East Texas when this happens. We don't want to be around here. So Mark is recording, and if you know about Mark, you know that Mark wasn't always around like some of the other apostles were. But Mark heard the stories from, who do you think? Peter. He heard the stories from Peter. And so he's relating. You notice there's no gospel according to Peter. But Mark is doing this, writing this. So he's recording these words, and we also know that in case if you're really looking for detail, if you're a detail-oriented person, Mark is not the gospel to look at, because Mark is like the wife that asks her husband, how was the day today? Fine. What did you do? Stuff. Bullet points. Not a lot of detail. In fact, usually no detail. So Luke, on the other hand, being a scholarly person, being a doctor of, I don't know what kind of a doctor you'd be then, he gave a lot of details. He researched. He had all of that. So that's why it's nice to kind of read back and forth sometimes, and we'll do that as we're rolling along here. So let's see what Mark
starts with a but.
Yeah. 13. And this is an idea of the signs of the end of the age. Last week he said nation will rise against nation, because they asked what will be the signs, so he gave them a bunch of signs. He's going to give some more today. Many will come to you claiming that they're me. Don't listen to them, because they're false messiahs. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. Such things must happen. This is from last week. But the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places and famines. And these are the beginning of birth pains. That's when the expectant mother first has her first pains, and she doesn't realize it's going to be hours and hours, or not necessarily. Say verse 9. So here we go in verse 9. You must be on your guard. You must be patient and observant. You will be handed over to the local councils and flogged in the synagogues. On account of me, you will stand before governors and kings as witnesses to them. And the gospel must be preached to all nations. These are the words of Jesus, and I don't know if you're in this Bible, like a lot of them, the red letters, it's all the words of Jesus. And you know, quite often that's kind of handy to see. We, of course, have an advantage that they didn't have because we're further along in history. We know when the temple was destroyed, and we know why. I'm sure that the apostles, looking at this, remember how this started out? Teacher, look at all these huge stones. Look at that, how magnificent, how beautiful. And that's how it started. Kind of a casual comment. Wow, look how awesome this is. And he says, I tell you the truth, not one of these stones will be left standing. Not one. They're all going to be thrown down. And that began the questions, and it became more. And at this point, Jesus is seated on the Mount of Olives, at the Mount of Olives, in their usual place where they hung out. And he starts to tell them. Now, he's going to lay out stuff that, well, he's already said some things here. We heard this, Andy Stanley did this, talked about this before, where he's saying you're going to be brought before councils. In other words, you're going to be put on trial, and you're going to be flogged. And he made the observation that they must have said, whoa, we didn't sign up for this. We're following, like today we would say, we're following the rock star around. Everybody loves Jesus and everybody loves us because we're following Jesus. Now you're telling us we're gonna be flogged? People died of being flogged. I'm sure there's a lot of, did he say what I thought he said? What's going on? Jesus, of course, had more to tell them because he knew exactly what was going to happen. He also warned them not to be deceived. I don't know if you even realize today how important that is, not to be deceived. Because wherever you turn, there is somebody who's saying, oh, what this verse really means, or what the Bible really means is this, thus and so. And if you've never read the Bible, you might go, oh, well, he's a pretty smart guy, he must be right. But if you've read the Bible, you might listen to what they're saying and go, wait a minute, that's out of character for who God is. And what I know of God, this is way out of character. There's something wrong here. If his followers were confused before about what Jesus had said, they were really going to scratch their head on some of the stuff that he's going to say next. He told them ahead of time that they were going to have to suffer at the hands of the leaders because of their devotion to him, to Jesus. So let's see And it's interesting, I feel it's interesting, and the gospel must first be preached to all nations. The word gospel in actually means good news. It's actually great news. And the gospel is the great news that just because of your past, now if you've had a unblemished past in your life, if you, and there's nobody that's had this, but never thought an evil thought, never did a bad thing, never whatever, never fell into temptation. The more that you did of that kind of stuff, the more guilt you felt, the more you thought, man, I can never go to God because look at all I've done. Certainly, he's gonna turn his back on me, which is exactly the reverse. This is why I find this so extremely interesting, that when we need him the most, when stuff's going on in our life that is tragic, that is overpowering our senses and our brain just is on overload, we stay at home, we don't go to church. We don't surround ourselves with other believers. We don't listen to, we may even stop our daily reading. We may, all of those things. But yet, and you'll talk to your neighbor. You'll vent to your neighbor. Because after all, your neighbor, I don't know whether you want to talk to your neighbor or not, but I'm just saying that this is the time when you should be paying attention to the way God is leading you. And so when things get rough and hard to handle, don't walk away from God, walk toward him. So this is and look at even his apostles. They didn't get it. They didn't really truly understand any of this. If you want somebody that is relatable to us in our world, it's these apostles. Because they don't really quite understand what he's talking about, because they're viewing him as an earthly Messiah that God has sent to redeem Israel. And when you redeem Israel and you sit on the throne and you fulfill all the prophecies, and when Jesus didn't appear to be doing that, and it looked like he was going closer and closer to being murdered on a cross, it was really not quite at that time, but it was at the time when Jesus is being anointed, a couple of times actually. I struggled through that lesson a few weeks ago as far as writing that. It was then that it says Satan entered Judas, and he went to offer his services to the Pharisees. I can hook you up with how to get Jesus in a more private setting where it's not so much in the public eye, because they were scared to death of the public. To me, that's reassuring. That's reassuring. If the religious as well as civil authorities at that time were afraid of the people, and the people were not exactly Harvard graduates, if they were afraid of them, then I think we underestimate our ability when we see something wrong that's going down. And then he makes mention about the what's going to happen when they go before. Well, it says in the gospel it must first be preached to all nations. All nations, all nations, all nations. Alert, alert, alert. I don't want you to just go to the Jews and tell them about this. That in order to get to the kingdom of God, in order to let alone have your sins forgiven, Jesus is the door you enter through to get to that place. And so, but he's saying the gospel first must be preached to all nations. When you read the word nations in the Bible, it is not talking about Israel. It's talking about every other country in the world except for Israel. There's the chosen people of God, the Jews, and there are the nations. And the nations could be the Babylonians, could be today it would be the Saudis, you name it, right on down the line, the Egyptians.
The word is ethnos, and that means a race of people, like different races of people fighting against each other.
Yeah. Verse 11, whenever you are arrested, it's like when you're arrested, we're going to be arrested too. We're going to be flogged. This doesn't sound good.
And there.
Whenever you are arrested and brought to trial, do not worry beforehand what to say. And that's not because your attorney's going to speak for you. Well, in some ways, Jesus is our advocate, which is like our attorney. Don't worry about what you'll say. Just say whatever is given to you at the time, for it is not you speaking, but the Holy Spirit. I think, I don't remember a lot of instances, but I do remember an instance, and it wasn't in this trial setting, when I was talking to a neighbor, and we were having a spirited discussion, and it was, I don't mean that to minimize. It was a serious discussion. It was a discussion about the Bible and about Jesus and so forth. But when I finished talking, I realized I had no idea where all that came from. Because I didn't plan on what I was going to say. It just came out. And so I always think of that when I read this part about don't worry about what you're going to say. The Spirit's going to be the one that's going to be speaking. Verse 12. Brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child. And children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death. When I started to see children turning their parents in for abuse, this has been a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
This was when we had a Samoan family that we knew in Hawaii, and they had a teenage daughter, but in the Samoan teenage daughter, she was a big girl, and the father was old school, and he was demanding of her what she was going to do, and they weren't beyond slapping him around. And so she called the police, and they came. Now this is how long ago has this been? This has been a long time, and they came out and investigated, and this is. I mean, well, we've been here for 22 years, so it was more than that. Maybe 30 years ago this was going on. So
it's not getting better.
no, children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death. I don't think she was asking to have them put to death. But all men will hate you because of who?
Me.
Me. Because of me, Jesus is speaking. But he who stands firm to the end, until the end, will be saved. Stand firm. Remember, I will not forsake you or leave you. I'm always going to be there for you, even though when it seems like, what do they say? When you think that God has abandoned you, has walked away from you, The real answer is God never left your side. You left him. So whenever you're feeling kind of alone in that way, you need to say, Lord, I need you more than ever. I need for you to be close to me. Now, you can, okay, so first of all, he started out in this, and he's talking about don't be deceived. These are, you ask for signs. What will be the sign of this happening? And he's saying, yeah, there's going to be wars and rumors of wars, and nation will rise up against others, and there'll be earthquakes in various places, and children will turn their parents in for being a follower of Jesus. But you must be on your guard, because you're gonna be handed in. I mean, if you can avoid being handed in, so be it. But if you're not, and you're handed in, then to the court system, then don't worry about it. I got you covered. Just like the rich kid that says, I'm not worried because my dad's got the most expensive attorney in town and he's going to represent me. Gosh, we can say we've got the best advocate, the very best representative in the entire world. And I don't even have to say a word. Now he skips in verse 14, he skips, to me, he's all over the map. But that's because Jesus does not live in the same time restraints as we do. We kind of a little bit about, we know what happened in the past to a degree. We have some idea. Well, look at the weatherman can't even get the weather straight. So tomorrow I hope I'm going to do this, or the next day. But after that, I make plans. But so this is what he says: when you see the abomination that causes desolation standing where it does not belong, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let her flee to the mountains. Okay. In the book of Daniel, there's a talk of Antiochus Epiphanes. Is how you pronounce his name? He did the same thing. He slaughtered a pig on the altar in the temple. He desecrated the temple. And then this is way in past history. And it was called the abomination that causes desolation. So Jesus is saying, there's going to be something like this that's going to happen in the temple. Now, think about it. There is no temple at the time that he's saying this. The temple's been destroyed. The temple's going to be destroyed in 70 AD. So actually, the temple's not destroyed yet. But he's talking about what's going to happen. He's giving them little prophetic messages, but they're very general. I don't know if you've ever read any or heard of any, watched a program maybe on Nostradamus. And when he takes his visions and puts them down on paper, they seem, and I'm sure at the time that he was, and this guy lived a long, long time ago, the way he wrote down what his visions were, he had no clue, because it was talking about stuff that when he was alive, he would have he never understood any of that. But he's just saying, I don't know what any of this means, but I had this vision, and he's writing it down. I think that these prophetic messages that Jesus says, even though they seem somewhat specific, they're not really specific. Because they don't say who it is, who's going to be the one to cause this abomination that leads to desolation to occur at the temple. We know because we, like I say, we've got the advantage of looking back at all the scripture. And they want details. Isn't that what everybody wants? Isn't that why everybody goes to the Cherokee psychic card reader or whatever she is in San Marcos? Because we want details. Don't give me this generalization thing. Someday you're going to eat dinner at a restaurant, and I'm going, yeah. So tell me something new. I don't know. We want to know if something's going to happen. We want to know some detail, time frame. We're not going to get that. Knowing the future is not all it would appear to be. We would not want to know. We would not want to know what's going on. Although the Antichrist is not mentioned here, we know that he will cause a treaty to be signed between Israel and his enemies, and in this case the Muslim world, that will allow the Jews to build a new temple. Now, the old temple hasn't even been torn down yet, but once again, we get a better view. It will be there in that temple that this abomination that causes desolation will occur. That's in Daniel 9:25 to 27. Now, an interesting phrase is used. Let the reader understand. This will be, when he's saying this will be a signal to get out of town quickly and flee to the mountains for the Jews. The Jews are not going to be looked upon as most favored nation when it comes to the person who's going to be the Antichrist. We've had different Antichrists, right? I mean, Hitler was an Antichrist. Stalin, you can go right down the line. But the Antichrist that is going to be the one that's going to leave his mark for all history is going to be this particular one. Don't delay. Okay, so let's see what he says about not delaying. Flee to the mountains. Let no one on the roof of his house go down or enter the house to take anything out. And that's where I want to do 60. Let no one in the field go back to get his cloak. And this is a terrible thing to have to find a break, because it goes on and on and on. But that's where I made the break. There's a lot of history that the Jews had. There was a great earthquake, and there was a time when the people escaped through a rift where the ground separated, and they escaped to the mountains. And this is in the past. So something similar to this is going to happen when this occurs. So he's giving them the big picture without a lot of detail. But I think part of this is when the time comes and you start hearing some of the things repeated that I'm telling you, don't worry about your flat screen TV. Don't worry about, oh, I left my iPhone 99 back there in the house. Just get out of Dodge. Go. Because you don't want to be caught. You don't want to be caught. In fact, you have your, what do they call it, a go bag? You have that bag with your clothes, change of clothes in it and some of your other stuff in it, and you got it by the door. So when the time comes, you're out of town.
It's be ready from getting ready.
Yeah,
From
that's
having to
right.
get things ready.
Time is of the essence. As you read his synopsis, and that's really what Jesus is doing, it's a synopsis of what's good, because he has traveled in his teaching over a lot of years, lots and thousands of years actually. And you might conclude that all of this is going to happen rather quickly, but that's not the case. We know that the tribulation is divided into 2 equal parts of 3.5 years each. So there's a 7-year tribulation. The first 3.5 years is kind of like you get to kind of see who's coming on the world stage, who's going to try to strike strike a treaty. That's why every time somebody wants to put together a treaty with Israel and whatever, you're going,
That's interesting.
that's interesting. And then but the last 3.5 years is called the Great Tribulation. This is where the Antichrist shows his true colors. Before that, he was like the great peacemaker, and he was just trying to be good for everybody. But then he stays in power for that 3.5 years. But then he makes a deal that will allow Israel to rebuild the temple. That'll satisfy the Muslims.
Deal of the century or something.
Yeah, definitely is the deal of the century. And then when that last 3.5 year time frame comes, that's when he says, I'm God. You bow down before me.
You bow down before my image.
Yes, and then he has an image made that he brings to life. So very interesting, Daniel. Good reading in Daniel.
Well,
So-
that is the wound.
Yes, and he's wounded, but he's brought back to life. Yeah, it's right out of. I mean, they could make a Left Behind series. It'd be great.
Oh, they already.
Oh yeah, they did. Shucks. Already, I always get the ideas at the wrong time.
Nothing new under the sun.
No, there's nothing new under the sun.